Hi there, I'm James Strode, publisher of the Global Legal Insights to Fund Finance. And with me today, we have Terry Hatton, Head of Fund Finance in the Americas for MUFG. Terry, Happy New Year. Thanks for joining.
Hey, James, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it, and Happy New Year to you. Although at this point, honestly, it feels like it's 5 weeks ago already.
Well, it's my pleasure. And perhaps your comment there has indicated a busy start to the year. Um, Last year, or towards the end of last year at least, there was a little bit more optimism within the fund finance market. I'm keen to hear your thoughts, whether you share those same beliefs.
Yeah, I think that there is cause for a little bit more optimism. I think a lot of things happened last year, as you know. Last year was relatively robust, at least in my mind, with a lot happening. Overall volume in our business was definitely down, and clearly there was pressure on pricing, at least for the borrowers. Was it a supply-demand imbalance? Um, that tends to be what takes place here, certainly. But right after Miami last year, some of the banks started struggling as a result of two or three different banks running into some different issues not related to the business itself, but more related to the banks in question. I do think that this year is going to be better than we saw in 23 in terms of volume. I do think it will be strong, but it's going to depend on the fundraising, which, right now I think we would probably peg it as being down somewhat. Um, Having said that, I think that there are a number of challenges ahead for many of the banks. Funding, in other words, liquidity, capital impacts, regulatory issues such as Basel IV. And I think we're just going to see judicious use of the balance sheet by GPs and, more importantly, by the banks, which need to see depository and other business. I think that we'll see ratings playing an important role going forward. We hope to have a wider discussion around that in Miami. But the ratings are going to assist many of the banks, and in some cases will be mandatory for doing business, irrespective of whether they're private or public ratings. Some banks may require them to be public, some will be indifferent, but these ratings are going to provide some of the capital relief that banks are seeking at this point in time. So, your question started off nice and simple and easy. I guess I could sum it up by saying I'm optimistic that the year will be more robust than last year. Will it hit the peaks of the prior year in 22? I'm not certain about that. 22 was a very, very strong year. Again, I think what we see here is a dependency on fundraising by the sponsors themselves.
Great stuff. And my experience of the fund finance industry has been that year on year, it evolves, it innovates, it has new products. 2023 was arguably the year of the NAV. Do you see the same thing happening again, or perhaps, again, in terms of innovation and growth, perhaps the secondaries market will come alive a little bit more? What about continuation funds? Any thoughts on that kind of thing?
Well, that's a whole bunch in one question, James. So let me start off with what's going to probably be a half hour. I'm kidding. Look, I think that the NAV is sometimes overplayed a little bit. I'm not sure it's as deep and robust as some think. Yes, certainly a lot of banks play in that business. We don't do as much of it as some of the other banks, that's for sure. I think that it exists for specific segments of the market. I think it's more applicable in the infra deals, in the real estate, the secondaries market. But there are challenges with the part of the market or this part of the market, just as buyers and sellers are coming to grips with valuations, I can see that happening with banks and sponsors. Look, cap rates have moved, and people are going to have to come to grips with that, and that may result in some reduced valuations. That's obviously not what the sponsors are looking for. Perhaps some of the newer NAV facilities that come out will be not as contentious, and I shouldn't really use the word contentious. I think that they'll be met with more open arms, perhaps, until we see that balance in valuations. In terms of the secondaries fund, I think that more than ever, these are going to play an important role going forward. They're going to be the liquidity that in some cases drives the ability for new investments by investors. The sovereigns seem to have plenty of cash, but some of the others may be pressed for cash to continue putting into the alternative sector. So what the secondaries funds do are provide that liquidity to those funds, to those investors, and they in turn can use that money to up into new funds themselves. The continuation funds that you mentioned, this is another way that cash can be recycled into the hands of investors that need it for new investments. So I do think they'll play a role going forward. Again, the idea of valuation comes in here significantly.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you, Terry. You've mentioned it once or twice already in this discussion, and that is ratings and that is liquidity. Just from your perspective, how seriously are you looking at the ratings now from the likes of Fitch and KBRA and all the other providers in that space to plug that liquidity gap, if you like, and make sure all those deals are robust?
Sure. So the ratings, the way they play into the liquidity, I think, is more into the capital requirements. So I think that what we'll see is the ratings will play a big role and will be examined carefully. We actually hope to have a wider discussion around that in Miami, and you can expect to see a number of the firms there that actually provide the ratings. But the ratings, they're going to assist many of the banks, likely mandatory for doing business. Again, they can be public, they can be private. Might be early to tell, but my own prediction is that they are going to play a significant role, and it's going to affect the RWA and bring it down for many banks. And that in turn is going to free up liquidity for them to put more money into the space.
Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from on that one. Just a final one from me, whether you've got any thoughts on this or it's too soon in 2024 to answer this. Globally, the fund finance market, are you expecting to see any maturity or growth across regions that perhaps we haven't seen so much of in recent times?
Well, I think you touched on it a little bit earlier when you said that the market constantly strives for innovation and ways of doing things. And again, the ratings are going to play a role in that going forward. I do think that the market will be strong. Look, at the product overall fundamentally has no issues and is a great source of core earnings and leads to other business for banks. That's going to continue to be key and going forward, that other business. There are some banks that certainly use this just as core earnings, but most banks are looking to leverage this into doing other things with the sponsors. I think globally we'll see expansion of the business from what it was last year. Again, I think last year marked a kind of low point in the trajectory that we saw going upward over time. And so consequently, we should see additional growth this year or growth from last year.
Yeah, great stuff. Well, look, we've touched upon a few topics in terms of secondaries market, continuation funds, the ratings, global perspectives as well. All of that actually this year we've got covered in the pink book, and that will provide the industry with some really up-to-date content for you guys. Just from your perspective, as an industry participant and leader, what do you get out of the pink book? What does it add to the industry for you and your colleagues at the bank?
Sure. Look, great question. And it's not just me, as you mentioned, it's my colleagues, it's everybody. Look, there isn't a single person that doesn't look forward to the pink book. And I know you can't possibly provide enough copies at the Miami conference or for any of them for that matter. And what we like about it is it's insightful, it's incredibly topical, and that's key. What happens here is it gets refreshed every year, and that's a key to a major key to the success of the book itself. I look forward to the articles. The articles aren't so lengthy that it takes you hours to get through them. They're not so technically driven that they're difficult to read. They're basically made for the layman person that's also been in the industry itself and has that experience. So the insightful nature of it, the fact that they're very topical, is a huge part of its success. Another thing I like about the Pink Book is that we see our attorneys play a significant role in this, and it's great to see somebody's name and get their insight into it. The Pink Book acts as a reference for many of us in the industry itself. And then again, as I say, we can point to the fact that our attorneys are doing something and we see what they're doing in the community.
Fantastic. Well, they're kind words, both for, of course, everybody that helps contribute and put the content together, and of course about the response. And just in terms of copies and so forth, indeed, we've upped the print run this year to try and cope with demand. But if you're too late in Miami and London and the other symposiums, fear not, it's all online, free to access, and also we're upping the digital footprint of it as well in terms of free PDFs, ebook downloads, and so on.
And James, that's great, because so many of us now just read everything on computer. To your point, I mean, if we can pull it up on our phone while we're on the train going home, on a plane traveling someplace, wherever, if we can access it in our spare time instead of just carrying the book around, that's great. And my prediction there is that it's going to become more useful and more widely read over time.
That's very kind of you. And look, it'd be remiss of me while we've got you not to talk about the Fund Finance Association. Last year, well, you guys saw record attendance at all your symposiums. Of course, the first Global Leadership Summit. What's 2024 got in store for the FFA?
Well, in 24, obviously Miami is right around the corner at this point in time. It's amazing. We start planning for these things over a year in advance. And when something comes around, I'm always amazed at how quickly it came around. Perhaps that's because we're talking about it every week. We meet as a board every week. But in 24, aside from the Miami conference, new this year is we've got a little mini conference symposium happening over in Tokyo this year, and that's going to take place in March, I believe it is. Next up after that is the Euro Symposium. That's in May, and I look forward to seeing you there. We're going back to the same location as last year. And then our Euro Summit, you referred to it as the Leadership Summit, that's going to take place in Portugal in the September-October timeframe. Then finally, the Asia Conference this year will be returning to Singapore in the late autumn. Again, I'd encourage everyone to reach out, get involved. We want your feedback. We want your suggestions. Get on the advisory councils in your respective jurisdictions and help lead and shape the content and what we're doing at the conferences. We really need that input.
Yeah, that's great. I would echo that totally, Terry, in terms of whether you're watching this or you're readers of the Pink Book, to get involved, send in your thoughts and your comments and any sort of innovation that you think might help the association, because it's driven by some wonderful people, of course, in the industry, but industry participation is of course the key to get things snowballing and continuing to develop and make the most for everybody as well. So look, Terry, I appreciate you've got you said it feels like it's been 2024 for 5 weeks already. You've got another busy week coming up, so I won't keep you much longer. Just wanted to, of course, wish you the best for 2024. Of course, the industry as a whole, and look forward to seeing you and everybody else at the Fontainebleau in February at the Global Symposium. And we'll catch up soon.
James, thank you. Have a great day.
Take care.